Hi everyone and welcome to our channel. In this first video, we're going to have a surface level introduction to living off-grid, something that's related to self-reliance, independence, freedom, and to help us with that, we're going to have a special guest today, James Lovejoy, or Jim. Jim's background is actually in the medical industry. He's been traveling around the world for many years and then has recently decided to settle down in Spain and live what is called off grid. So he's been living a very different lifestyle to what we live in urban areas, very based towards controlling your own energy consumption, providing for yourself in terms of food, and just basically self-reliance. And he's been living for 2 years now, and he's going to share some of his insights into that kind of lifestyle and his top tips, as well as how to get into it if you're interested at the end of the video. So let's dive right into it.
Okay, so my name is Jim Lovejoy. Currently living in the Campo, in the countryside of Spain, up in the mountains. And although there's no local power available here, it is possible to have it brought into this location, but it's extremely, extremely expensive, like more than the cost of the property just to bring it in. So obviously solar is the way to go. It kind of fits in with my general objective of why I moved to this area, kind of getting closer to nature and having a farm and animals and being self-reliant to a degree. So solar fits into that paradigm very well. And I think with the cost of solar coming down now considerably, that you can get a system that performs quite well for a very reasonable amount of money. Start off very simply and then add to a system as your needs might increase. I'm in the process of building a house out here. So I have a small wooden house that I live in right now with a small solar system. But in the future, say in the next year or so, when I have the house finished, then I'm anticipating expanding my system to have a little bit more power and a little bit more PV input. So I've been living here off grid for about 2.5 years now. And it's a little bit different than living on grid. Not a lot, but you become much more conscious about how you use power. When I was young, my father used to follow me around the house and tell me to constantly shut off the lights and so forth, but you didn't think of it that much because if you needed more power, it was always right at the plug. The primary difference I find in solar is that you can't use what you don't produce, store, or deliver. So you have to be conscious of what you have, what your needs are, and then be efficient and ecological in terms of your usage of that power, which I think is a good idea even if you're using grid power, but it becomes more of a way of life once you go off grid. Let me see. So
Those are some really
my current setup here is small. Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I think there was just a bit of a lag. I was saying these are some really interesting concepts. So you've mentioned that you've been interested in living sort of on you're having your own sort of house and living with taking care of animals and having your own electricity, being self-sufficient. What do you think attracted you the most to this style of life? So what made you interested in living off grid?
Well, actually, throughout my career, my objective originally was to retire into a similar area, but in the United States, someplace that was much more rural, probably didn't have power. I wanted to build a log cabin and pretty much live the same lifestyle that I'm living here, but in the United States. But plans changed, decided to come to Spain. And the motivation for it is kind of twofold, is that I think part of our society has become very consumption oriented, materialistically oriented. And I've certainly done that in a portion of my life. But as I've gotten older, I said, even though the power is available, it has to be produced. And it can be produced by oil or gas or nuclear, but someone has to actually produce it. And having the control over the generation and delivery of the power is something that kind of fits into my self-reliant lifestyle. Not that I'm somebody who's looking to separate myself from society, but to live sustainably, to say I can produce a lot of my own food, my own meat, I can generate my own electricity. And it requires a small adjustment in lifestyle, more so about being conscious about how you use your power than the absolute amount. Because for what I find to be a very reasonable amount of money, you can design and install a system that gives you what you need. You can't run, your electric stove, your air conditioner, your washing machine, and your electric hot water heater all the time. But if you take a little planning and do that and say, I'm going to use the most efficient way to generate heat in my oven, which maybe that's butane. And same thing for hot water. And then since I'm starting from a new place, I have the ability to kind of pick and choose what appliances in my lifestyle. But it's pretty easy to transpose that into a current living situation. You just become a little bit more conscious about when you use the power and how much you need. So you don't have to get a huge, 20 kilowatt system to be able to live a comfortable lifestyle. And so that appeals to me because I think, it sounds slightly political or social, but I think we've been caught up more in this consumerism, and it's like getting caught on a merry-go-round and not being able to get off. You're constantly looking to buy something more, this or that. And then if you take a more simplistic approach to things and look at your life, you can say, wow, I can live a really good life with a very reasonable investment in solar energy and my house and so forth, and enjoy life more and worry less about having to pay for all the things that go into leading a consumeristic lifestyle.
Yeah. And I'd go on to add to that. So the fact that society is becoming more and more hedonistic, with people wanting to buy more and not settling for just more and more, and the fact that mental health has become a very prevalent topic, these recent years shows that there's been a shift from what used to be a sort of more calm lifestyle. And I think this ties in with another hot topic that you brought up, which is living sustainably. Um, you've mentioned that having only to make simple adjustments in terms of your electricity consumption and knowing when to turn on different electrical appliances on. But would you say you've had to do the same with food, for example? Or have you had to ration food and plan ahead as you've been doing with electricity and the times in which you use your appliances?
Well, it's a bit of a learning process. Like, for example, I have a medium-sized garden for a non-farmer person, and part of that is learning how to manage that process well. So what to plant when to plant secondary crops, and so forth. And part of the thing it becomes, I like the idea of sustainability / independence. Solar represents a part of a three-legged stool, so to speak, where if you can supply your own power, then you're able to do the things that require that in your home. By having your own garden, you become less reliant on GMO-based foods. You eat healthier. And where I live in Spain, it's actually quite popular to have a campo house. So it's a place you go to on the weekend and you enjoy your friends and your family and the nature and so forth. And that's something that really appealed to me after spending my life traveling the world working in medical technology. I said, wouldn't it be nice to spend more time living in the moment and appreciating what you have rather than constantly looking for the next thing to feed the return on investment is actually very reasonable. So I think that it's a little bit of a societal change. And I think maybe, who knows, maybe a little bit of this, the upside to the very difficult situation that's happening currently with the coronavirus is that we say, hey, wait a second, we become much more dependent upon supply chains, and we see the effect of that now. What if I could remove one component of that and say, I don't have to worry about whether they're generating enough power. And in parts of Europe, they're shutting down nuclear power. So the question is, where's that extra power going to come from? More coal, more fuel? Is it going to be renewable? Well, I don't have to worry about all that because now I put all the decision-making criteria into my own hands. And if I want more power, if I need more power, I say, all right, well, I have to purchase it. But it's possible to do that. And you do it in a responsible way. You don't just say, hey, no big deal. I just turn on the switch and I got all the power I need. So that appeals to me in terms of being responsible for my own actions and for what I consume.
I guess there's this element of taking ownership of the way that you live and how it's affecting the planet, as well as how you want to spend the resources that you have and the resources that the earth can provide you with.
Mm-hmm.
You said there's been a bit of an adjustment period. And you've also mentioned you've been living off grid for 2.5 years. So how long do you think it took you to sort of ease into that new lifestyle? And what would be your maybe first tips for someone who wants to try out living off grid or permanently go on live off grid?
I think one of the most important components of that, there's two sides I look at: the technical side, which is the system, and then the behavioral aspect, which is how you work with it. Um, to sound a little bit of a techie for a second, doing a load profile. So to really understand how much energy you need to produce, when you use it, and what you really need versus what is more of a luxury. And do you want to pay for that, or do you not want to pay for that? So for example, anything that uses a high amount of power, those are things that I use during the day, because the most expensive component in a solar system is your battery bank. So if you can learn to use your washing machine at 11 o'clock in the morning instead of 8 o'clock at night, then you don't have to buy as large a battery bank, so you have a more, and it's a minor disturbance initially. You have to say, oh, I just can't throw a load of laundry in whenever I feel like it. But at the end of the day, you go, it's really not a big price to pay. You just have to plan a little bit. So you become more conscious of how you use your power. And that's the biggest part. And it's not, I personally don't find it that difficult, because you just start saying, all right, I load profile, so I understand how much energy I need to produce and store and deliver. And then not too small, not too expensive, not too inexpensive. It just fits well into your needs. So I found that to be a really important part of how I was involved in designing the system. And then the social behavioral side of it is to go, it's kind of, not to sound biblical, but it's an issue of gluttony, so to speak. Do you really need to consume everything that's right at your fingertips? No, you don't. So if you just say, hey, look, I need to be sensible about this, and what I do impacts the rest of the world. And if I am conscious of how I consume my power, in a small way, you contribute to a greener environment. And so that appeals to me, which is really weird coming from a science and sales background. It's a little bit more esoteric and philosophical, but I think if more people embrace that, we'd find ourselves less caught up in on the wheel of consumerism.
Well, that's one very current ideology as well, and I would agree with you in having to step back, reevaluate how we live, and perhaps use less resources. Um, so you've moving on to the more technical side, without getting into too much detail. What would you say your current system is composed of? So, and how complex do you think it was to put it together as someone who hadn't really fiddled with electricity before?
I hate to say it, but it's amazingly simple. If you can use a screwdriver and you can read, you can do it. So the most important part is to make sure that the components you have are the correct for what you need. Once again, the load profile is really important. But as far as actually putting it together, it's really, really simple. If you're a little bit handy with tools, not a technical person, but just handy with tools, anybody can do it. So it's really, the new technology has become very, very simple. I have an Outback all-in-one hybrid inverter. And really all you have to do is attach the wires from the PV input, attach your batteries, attach it to your system. And yes, you're going to get in and fine tune your settings, but the basic things to get it up and running, it's an afternoon to do it for a small system. I mean, if you get into a bigger system, obviously it takes a little bit more time. But for me, I'd say probably it took me 6 hours to put everything together, get it set up and running, and adjust the settings. And it was really, really simple. So I think it's something that a lot of people who, I'm looking at this, say for my environment in the Spanish market, if you're the kind of person that can maintain your house and use tools and so forth, then anybody can do it.
So what does your system currently power then? What appliances are plugged into it?
Well, right now I have a washing machine, refrigerator, couple computers, lights. I have a electric greenhouse, I guess you could call it. It's what I use for doing the sprouting my plants when it's still cold out and getting my plants started before I put them in the garden. So I don't know what my max, I'd say actually my peak load is probably 1,000 watts at a time, which is less than, it's a small house and it's a country house. But so I have a 1.5 kilowatt inverter. I have about 4 kilowatt hours of battery. And I have six 285 watt panels. And they actually, out here in Spain, they actually produce more than I need. I bought those more so for my stage 2 in my house when I get my house finished. But the other advantage is that with the systems, you can run multiple inverters in parallel. So you can say, instead of having to throw out what I have now, I can just add an additional unit and then increase my peak output and change my battery bank. So all the components of my system can be reused or repurposed as I move forward. That was part of what I tried to plan as I did it. So you could start really small and just supply your basic loads, as long as you don't try to take into effect in your choices that there may be an increase in capacity that you need in the future. So
in terms of starting small, then, how small of a budget could you essentially start living off grid on? And what would you say the return on investment is, just roughly speaking?
if I look at mine, I'd say I probably have somewhere around 3,000 or 3,500 euros into it. You could start smaller than that. It's something like out here, campo houses, like when I talk to people, typically people say, hey, I'd like to be able to power a refrigerator, a stereo, my lights, computers, and basic stuff like that, and I could start there. And so 1,000 watts and a small battery bank and a couple of solar panels would do that fine. Some of the things I bought a little bit with the understanding that I didn't want to have to replace them when I went to my house. So, for example, you could probably run the load that I have off of 2 or 3 panels, but I went to 6 because I said that's what I'll need for my house. So that's all set up and the array is all mounted and so forth. So, I mean, you could start as small, I'd say somewhere around 1,000 euros and get a small system that just did the basics you need. You could install it in an afternoon, and you could go from some of the campo houses out here don't have electricity, and they just use, renewables, a generator or something like that, which is not my first choice. But for a very small investment, you can get into solar and so forth. You have to be, the smaller your system, you have to be more conscious of how you use your energy and so forth. But no, for very small investment, you can get that. I'd say that if you looked at overall, if, for example, out here, a connection fee, like I said, would be probably 50,000 euros to where I am. So you don't take that away. But if you said, what's the return on investment? It's a little bit harder when you're pure off grid. But I'd say out here, it's somewhere in the 4 to 5 year time frame. And so then after that, you're producing it for free. And so plus the idea, I like the idea too I like autonomy. I don't like having to depend on other people for things as much as possible. And so having to say out here, you get brownouts and shutoffs and so forth, and being able to just say, I know that if I have designed and installed my system correctly, I know I'm going to have power. And if it's out here in Spain, it's not rainy very often, thank God, although this spring has been very rainy. But you can use a generator, for a very small generator, for the very few times that you need backup power. So I've had this system here, the one that I currently have, for about a little over a year, and only one time have I ever had the batteries completely discharged and it tell me that I can't do it. So, and then the next morning at 9 o'clock, I had power again. So even the way the system's designed has really met my needs really well. But I think I'm probably repeating myself a little bit, but the initial design process to figuring out how much energy you need to produce, store, and deliver is really important to how happy you're going to be with the system. It takes a few minutes to do it, but whoever you buy your system from, insist on that. I could highly recommend. Matter of fact, I would insist that there's no way you can be. It's a roll of the dice if you don't do something like that. And if I'm going to invest money, I don't like to roll dice. So.
Well, from what I gather, this is living off grid seems like a very much easier experience than it seems on the outside. So you've sort of debunked some myths around the cost that it takes to go off grid, the life adjustments required to go off grid, and just common misconceptions which seem to be quite prevalent in the society that we live in. And perhaps if I could ask you to talk more about the challenges you had before moving off grid, maybe some beliefs you thought were stopping you from doing so earlier, or just within settling what the initial inconveniences were?
Well, I think I have a slightly advantageous position on that, I believe, from my experiences, in that um, from the time I was a young boy, um, my family were into hunting and fishing and camping and so forth. So I was used to the idea of that when you go into that environment, you don't have the same resources at your hands that you do when you're living in London. If you were to take somebody who lived in London and said, I want to duplicate my exact lifestyle and then drop it into the campo of Spain, it would be a very expensive system. But what happens in this process, or at least happened for me, is you really sit down and you kind of review your life and you say, what do I really need? What do I really want? So it starts out on what do I need? That's the first level. What would I like to have is the second level. And the third would be, in a perfect world where money wasn't an issue, what could I have? And so for me, you kind of go through that process and you say, well, what do I really need to enjoy my life where I'm living? And in doing that, I look through it and I go, it's really kind of interesting. I really don't need all that much. And it's, if you're, I don't want to say conservative, if you're mindful of how you use power, which I think is a good idea, regardless of whether you have the grid connection or whatever else, I just think it makes good sense to be conscious of that. And regardless of your financial position, if you got all the money in the world and all your power bill to you is how much you write on your check, even then, it's just, I don't believe in the concept of wasting resources unnecessarily. And if you embrace that philosophy, then it's very easy and inexpensive to get into solar. If you're a person who says, no, I want to replicate my life exactly with exactly same kind of components and exactly same lifestyle, it can be done, but you have to have the resources, financial resources, to do that. So I think if you go into it and explore it, regardless of how much money you have, you realize, hey, I really don't need quite as much power as I have at home. I just have to be a little more conscious and conscientious of how I use the power. So for me, it was a kind of an easy process because it had been an objective of mine all along. And when my original dream was to have a cabin in the woods in the mountains in Maine, and I wouldn't have had power anyway except a generator. So that dream that I had, it morphed as technology changed and became A, possible, and B, more cost efficient to do it. So I really don't think, for me personally, there's no compromise. It's just a question of finances. And even then, it's, so what do you really need? You have a washing machine and a dryer and a refrigerator and your stove and so forth, and you figure out how to organize your life. And it's a really quite a simple process.
So you're living a dream, Jim.
I am living my dream. I feel really, really fortunate. You should see, I wake up in the morning and then you get the most unbelievable sunrises. And yes, where I'm living now, and it's like a hunting camp. I have outside water. I don't have inside water yet. My house will have inside water. But so you go, okay, so what? It's not a big deal. And so you get a chance to live the dream that you want. And I feel really, really fortunate to have it. It's a beautiful area. The weather's fantastic. I can generate all my own power. I can grow I'm into organic gardening. So that's, possible and enjoyable out here. And chickens and dogs and all that. So it's a good life. So I feel very fortunate.
Well, it sounds like it. I mean, you're making me want to just drop my degree and then go and join you and live off grid from now. You've highlighted a lot of advantages, in fact, independence, just this feeling of taking ownership of not only of your lifestyle, but how you spend and how you utilize the resources around you. You've mentioned very, very little disadvantages, but realistically speaking, would you say there's one sort of thing that just keeps coming again and again that you think is bothering you?
It's not a problem. It's more something you have to be conscious of. And that
Right.
because you're producing your own power, you have to make sure your system functions correctly. So you have that responsibility. So I'm relatively, for someone my age, someone relatively technical and comfortable with all that. But with the system, you don't have to be that way to function with a system at the level that I have. It's actually quite simple. And I say the only thing that's a quote unquote downside is the necessity of being conscious of checking your batteries once in a while, looking at your system to make sure it's okay, keeping your solar panels clean. And for that small investment of consciousness of the system, it delivers what you want. So it's like most things in life, you get out of it what you put into it. So a little bit of effort pays a lot of dividends. So for example, like it's very dusty out here. So I wash my panels off every couple of weeks. Takes the dust off of them, increases production and so forth. If I didn't do that, my power production would continue to drop and eventually it would be probably below what I need it to be. So it's a little bit of effort like that. But by being a little conscious of the system, I'd say that's probably the biggest problem that I see.
Right. So planning, planning, planning in the beginning, throughout, in the end, and just maintaining the way that you're doing things, you'd say.
Right. I think so. Education. So taking the time to understand a little bit about the basics of how a system operates. You don't have to get into all the algorithms and software and firmware. I'm just saying how it basically functions and being conscious of that. And anybody can. It's not beyond the intellectual capacity of anybody. You can do those very basic things. Keep things clean and check them and make sure the connections are good every so often, and your system will work for a real long time.
Well, I'm really glad you're dumbing this down for us, Jim, because it's helpful to understand how this isn't some sort of esoteric lifestyle. It's a reality that can be achieved and that doesn't need much investment in terms of becoming very technical or a massive financial investment or even a massive lifestyle change. It's rather something that comes naturally to one, and with some interest, it's very achievable. And you're a living example of it. Perhaps to sort of draw a conclusion in all this, you've mentioned wanting to build another house. What would you say your future plans moving forward in terms of off-grid life would be, Jim?
Well, yeah, I'm building basically it's a replica of an old style Spanish farmhouse, all stone and wooden beams and clay tile roof and so forth. So it's a little bit bigger where I'm living now, which is good. But so I might need 3 kilowatt peak output. I need a bigger battery bank. I have enough solar. My solar array is big enough for my next place. Since I figured instead of buying panels a little bit at a time, and for example, when I bought my panels, an average panel was a 285 watt panel. Now I'm seeing more and more people use, say, 300, 330, 350 watt panels, and you don't want to mix them in the same system. So that's one of the reasons why I said if I'm going to buy my PV array, I'm going to buy for the next one instead of having some 285 watt panels and some 330 watt panels and having the 285s make the 330s only produce 285 watts. So all that stuff, I didn't want that to happen. So I said, I'll just buy it all at once and be happy with that. I will increase my battery bank. And there's a little bit of a debate on whether to go with some of the lead acid technologies or lithium ion. The difference between them that I see is lead acid is less expensive to buy initially. There's
Right.
maintenance, and cycle life is considerably less. Lithium ion is a little bit more in terms of initial purchase price, but the cycle life is 2 to 3 times greater. The price is probably maybe, I don't know. I don't know exactly. It depends on what size of bank you get. It's a little bit more. So I will go to, I believe, lithium ion batteries in my next one, because that way I could buy, say, twice the capacity that I have right now. And just, if that's not enough, I could buy one more lithium ion battery and include it. With lead acid, for example, when I looked at the technology, it's made up, a battery bank, say a 48 volt battery bank is made up of 24 2-volt cells. If you want more capacity, you can't just add another cell because that would make it a 50 volt battery. You'd have to buy a whole nother battery bank. And so for me, the most cost effective and upgradable option would be lithium ion, because I could, say, double the capacity I have right now, which should be enough. But if I find it's not, I don't have to say, wow, I just spent $3,000 on a battery bank. It's not enough. I got to buy another 3,000 watt hour, battery bank, €3,000 or 3,000 euro battery bank. So for me, lithium ion makes more sense in terms of its flexibility in adding additional capacity over lead acid. It's a little bit more expensive in purchase, but I believe based on the information that I've looked at, it's actually less expensive over the life of the system.
You've pointed out some very interesting differences, Jim, and I think for the purpose of other videos in which we delve into more technical details, we could compare even more components and have your suggestions about different systems. Perhaps my last question to you would be, what are your final comments to anyone who's maybe considering living off grid right now and just wants to get started in some way? What would you say to them?
Well, if you go on the internet and you hear some people say, "Oh no, solar's too expensive, it's too complicated," and this and that, and you have other people saying, "No, no, no, it's really good and it's very easy," and so forth. I'd say explore it. It's very easy to take a little bit of time and do a little bit of research to do that. Talk with an installer like Xerogrid and say, "This is what I'm thinking. What can you guys do?" And I think you'd be very pleasantly surprised that it's not as expensive as you think it is. It's not inexpensive, but if you look at the cost over the life of the system and what the benefits are, I think it's a very good investment. So I'd say take the time to investigate it and talk to an installer like Xerogrid, who does a good job of designing the system with a load profile, tailoring it to your specific needs. I think that's key. It's easy enough to go to a website and pick out a product and so forth, but if you don't have the background, you're going, wow, is that really a big enough inverter for me? Or is those battery, they say that this is a little bit more technical side. Oh, they're saying they're 250 amp hours at C100, but they should be really quoting a figure at C20. In other words, a discharge rate over 20 hours as opposed to 100 hours. So that can be a little bit misleading. So buying online without some background and experience and knowing what to look for, I don't think it's the best bet. That it makes most sense to talk, because you're talking about a significant investment. It's more than €1,000. That it makes sense to go to an expert and make sure that you're getting exactly what you need. So I personally would recommend a call to somebody like Xerogrid and then explore it, figure out what's involved in it, and know that you're making an informed decision.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
That's it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and came out with something useful. If you have any questions or if you'd like to discuss some advice with regard to the technical side of things and just getting started in general, please have a look at our website. The link is going to be in the description. And feel free to call us. We're more than happy to have a chat with you and to help. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and stay tuned for more content. See you in the next video.